The Caribbean sun shone brightly above the dense jungles of Mexico's Yucatán Peninsula, warming the earth and painting the turquoise coastline with dazzling light. Tourists wandered along white beaches between the towns of Tulum and Playa del Carmen, their laughter drifting across the waves as boats rocked lazily offshore. Yet beneath that vibrant surface, hidden under layers of limestone and jungle roots, another world existed, a vast labyrinth of silent caves and underground rivers that had remained untouched for thousands of years. In those submerged tunnels, darkness ruled. No sunlight reached the ancient chambers. Only cold water flowed through narrow passages carved by time, winding through a hidden underworld that stretched for miles beneath the Yucatán Peninsula. For archaeologists and cave divers, these flooded caves were not merely geological curiosities. They were time capsules. And on one humid morning late in the year, a small team of explorers prepared to enter that darkness once again. At the edge of a jungle clearing, surrounded by thick vegetation and the faint calls of distant birds, a circular pool of crystal-clear water shimmered under the sun. It looked almost unreal, an opening into the earth itself. This was a cenote. Cenotes, natural sinkholes formed when limestone collapsed, revealed the entrances to the immense underground cave systems that lay beneath the region. For centuries, they had fascinated scientists, divers, and historians alike. Standing beside the pool, Octavio del Rio checked the valves on his diving tank with careful precision. Del Rio was not an ordinary diver. He was a cave diving archaeologist working with Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, known as National Institute of Anthropology and History, or INAH. For decades, he had dedicated his life to exploring the submerged caves of the Yucatán Peninsula. The work demanded extraordinary skill. Cave diving was among the most dangerous forms of exploration in the world. A single wrong turn in a submerged tunnel could mean becoming lost forever in darkness. But for Del Rio, the risks were worth it. Because beneath these waters, the past was waiting. He tightened the straps of his gear and glanced at the quiet jungle around him. The air smelled of damp earth and salt carried inland from the nearby Caribbean Sea. Nearby, two other divers finished preparing their equipment. "Visibility should be good today," one of them said, adjusting his mask. Del Rio nodded. "Let's hope the currents stay calm," he replied. He had explored many caves in the region before, yet each dive carried uncertainty. The Yucatan's cave systems were vast and only partially mapped. New passages and chambers were still being discovered. Sometimes they held nothing more than mineral formations or ancient rock. But sometimes they held something far more extraordinary. Human history. Over the past 3 decades, divers in the region had made a series of discoveries that reshaped what scientists believed about the earliest people to reach the Americas. Skeletons had been found deep inside the caves, ancient human remains preserved in the still, mineral-rich water. 11 such skeletons, including the one they hoped to investigate further that day. Some of those remains were astonishingly old. 13,000 years old. Perhaps older. Those discoveries challenged long-standing assumptions about when and how the first humans arrived in North America. The caves were silent witnesses to a distant time, the end of the Ice Age, when sea levels were far lower and many of these caverns were dry. Back then, humans and animals could walk through passages that were now completely submerged. Del Rio secured his mask and gave a final glance at the cenote's mirror-like surface. "Ready?" he asked. The other divers nodded. Without another word, they stepped into the water. The surface closed above them with a gentle ripple. The temperature dropped immediately as they descended. Cool water surrounded them, muffling every sound except the slow rhythm of breathing through regulators. Del Rio switched on his dive light. A powerful beam cut through the darkness. Below them, limestone walls appeared like pale ghosts in the water. The entrance shaft of the cenote descended before curving into a horizontal tunnel, the gateway to the immense underground network. The divers moved carefully. A thin guideline stretched ahead into the darkness, left by previous explorers to ensure a safe path out. Every movement had to be deliberate. Even a small disturbance could stir clouds of sediment that would erase visibility completely. Del Rio followed the line into the cave. The ceiling lowered as the passage narrowed. Rock formations hung above like jagged teeth, sculpted by thousands of years of dripping water before the caves had flooded. Their lights revealed formations of stalactites and stalagmites frozen in time, ancient structures that could only have formed when the caves were dry. Proof that these underwater worlds had once been open to the air. The divers swam deeper. 100 feet. 200. 300. The tunnel twisted gently through the limestone, opening occasionally into small chambers before tightening again. Del Rio checked his instruments. Everything remained steady. They continued forward. Finally, after swimming roughly 200 meters, about 650 feet, the tunnel widened. They had reached an inner chamber. The space opened suddenly like an underground cathedral. Their light stretched across smooth walls coated with mineral deposits. At the bottom of the chamber lay soft sediment, a dune of pale sand that had slowly gathered over centuries. Del Rio's beam swept across the floor. And then he stopped moving. Something was there. At first it looked like nothing more than scattered shapes within the sediment. But as the light focused, the shapes became unmistakable. Bones. Human bones. Even after decades of exploration, the sight still sent a quiet chill through him. The skeleton rested partially buried within the sandy mound. Its fragile structure remained largely intact. The skull tilted slightly to one side, as if gazing upward toward the darkness above. Del Rio floated silently above the remains. His heart beat faster inside his chest. He had seen ancient skeletons before in these caves, but every discovery carried a unique story. And this one raised immediate questions. The position of the bones seemed deliberate. The body was not scattered randomly as if it had fallen or been washed into the cave by water. Instead, it appeared to rest carefully placed upon the sediment. Almost as though someone long ago had chosen that exact spot. One of the divers swam closer and hovered beside him. He signaled with his light. Del Rio nodded slowly. Yes. They were seeing the same thing. The skeleton had been positioned intentionally. For a moment, the chamber remained perfectly still. The divers' lights illuminated the ancient remains, silent evidence of a life that had ended thousands of years earlier. Somewhere far above them, sunlight warmed the beaches of the Caribbean. But down here, in the cold darkness of the cave, time had barely moved. Del Rio studied the skeleton carefully, mindful not to disturb the delicate sediment around it. The cave ceiling above showed mineral formations that could only have formed when the chamber was dry. Which meant one thing. When this person died, this cave had not yet been flooded. Thousands of years ago, during the final stages of the Ice Age, sea levels had been dramatically lower. Many caves now filled with water had once been accessible passages through the limestone landscape. Humans could have entered freely. Animals too. In fact, Previous explorations had uncovered remains of creatures that had long since vanished from the earth. Giant sloths, ancient bears, even saber-toothed predators. Their bones rested within nearby chambers, preserved in remarkable condition. The caves had become an enormous archive of prehistoric life. But human remains were far rarer and far more significant, because they could help answer one of archaeology's most enduring questions. Who were the first people to reach the Americas? And how did they arrive? Del Rio hovered quietly above the skeleton, imagining the distant past. A dry cave passage. A group of ancient people moving through the darkness with torches. A ritual. A burial. Perhaps a farewell to someone important in their community. The skeleton's resting place suggested intention, respect, memory. He felt a deep sense of responsibility as he looked at the remains. This was not merely an artifact. It had once been a person. A life lived in a world that no longer existed. Del Rio lifted his camera and carefully began documenting the scene. Every angle. Every detail. Each photograph would later help scientists reconstruct the context of the discovery. The team worked slowly and methodically, ensuring nothing disturbed the delicate site. After several minutes, Del Rio signaled that it was time to return. Their air supply would not allow them to remain much longer. The divers gave one final glance at the skeleton. Then they turned and followed the guideline back into the tunnel. The chamber faded into darkness behind them. But the discovery they had just made would soon echo far beyond the silent caves of the Yucatán.